My name is Matthew. I'm the president of Freethought Society. I just want to say welcome to everyone, welcome to our members, welcome to our guests, and especially welcome to Kate. For those who don't know who we are, and you came just because Kate is here, which is great, we are a local organization for atheists, agnostics, non-theists, non-believers, freethinkers, secularists, skeptics. Any word that says I don't believe in spirituality and gods, that's us. Our mission is to create a community for rational, God's-free living that serves the needs and interests of our members. We do that through four main pillars: activism, community, education, and service. And we are a chapter of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We're the local chapter. We're also an affiliate of American Atheists and American Humanist Association. So before we get to the main event, I need to take care of business because they gave me a microphone to talk into. First, I want to thank our venue, RUMA. The mission here at Raleigh United Mutual Aid Hub is to serve as a point of connection between the residents, communities, and mutual aid projects in and around Raleigh. They are really gracious to have spaces like this available for us to use. We're very excited. If you want to be ultra modern, you can scan that QR code and you can go over to their website and give them a donation to thank them for having a place like this available. I'm sure they would appreciate it because that's how they stay in business. And if you're feeling super generous, you can always come over to the TFS website by scanning that QR code, where you can join the organization or you can just make a donation. If you were to go to trianglefreethought.org and join, you would instantly be subscribed to our newsletter. If you said, ooh, a newsletter with events like this, that would be great, but I don't want to give you money, that's fine too. Scan this QR code or go to the website and look for the newsletter sign up, and you can sign up for a newsletter without being a member. We're happy to have the community more than we want the money. So one of our pillars is activism, and we have some activism coming up that I'm excited about, so I just want to share. One of our members contacted us last year saying, I want to do an advocacy day, a day where we meet down by the General Assembly. We give out names of our representatives and senators who are representing wherever you're from. Stacks of them. We go in groups, we go to their offices, we talk to them about separation of church and state and the issues that we as an organization care about, we as a community care about. You don't have to be a member of the organization to join in on it. We're happy to have people come support. And just try to make those contacts and say, we're secular, we vote, you should know we're here. So we're working to schedule that. We had a speaker right before the pandemic started, Mark Dan, who's the lobbyist for Freedom from Religious Foundation, and he was giving us tips on it. So we have recently reconnected with him, and we're having a call with him later this week to get tips and tricks so we can schedule this. Like I say, community is one of our main keys. So community, tonight, after Kate is done talking to us, around the corner is the Morgan Street Food Hall. So we were hoping to go over there and just try to grab tables as close together as we can find them and enjoy some community together. We also do regular scheduled meetups. So we call our Happy Heathen Hours. And we do one in the Durham Chapel Hill area the second Monday of the month at NAMU, one in the Raleigh-Cary area the second Friday of the month at Raleigh Point Sports Grill right across the street from SAS on Harrison Avenue. We do a virtual one the fourth Monday of the month. That's in your computer. You can RSVP for that. RSVP for those on Facebook or on Meetup, or just show up. You don't have to RSVP if you don't want people seeing that you RSVP for this kind of event. We're happy to have you. Weekly, we have what we call our secular Saturday socials. Panera Bread off Lake Boone at 10 in the morning. So come grab breakfast, sit around and talk philosophy and secularism and whatever other topics float their way. We do it once a month currently in Durham at the Panera Bread in Patterson Place. That's the third Saturday of the month. And education. Education means meetings like this. So I'll just give you a quick preview of coming attractions, some speakers we have coming up. Brittany and Jesse from the I Doubt It podcast. And then we're talking to Andrew Seigel about May or June timeframe coming down. He used to be with FFRF. He's our most common speaker. I think he's already been here 3 times, so this will be the record-breaking 4th time. But now with Americans United instead of FFRF. And now, the reason that you're here. I'm not going to say very much because he's going to say everything about it, and I hate to steal your thunder by doing your bio when that's going to be your first 2 slides anyway. Or, I know you don't have slides, but your first thing. Kate is a columnist for the Washington Post. It's a good column this week. It was like Wednesday, did it come out, Thursday? So it was very cool. I follow you. And she is a multi-author, so she has 3 books. The most recent one is We Have Little Faith, Why I Stopped Pretending to Believe, and Maybe You Should Too. And most important for us as a chapter of FFRF, she just became the FFRF Freethought Heroine at our last national meeting. So congratulations. So
my name is Kate. I'm from Albany, New York. I'm very happy to have an excuse to come down to North Carolina. Tempted to say come home to North Carolina because I lived in Durham for the first 3 years of my life when my father was at Duke. And ever since I've been attracted to hush puppies and strangely confused about the color blue. So I want to tell you today about my book, which is called We of Little Faith. And I hope at the end that we'll have plenty of time to talk because there's a lot to talk about. So We of Little Faith, some of you had it. It has 2 parts, really. The first part is the story of how it took me decades to be honest about not believing in God and what happened when I finally did. And the second part talks about each of the benefits that people get from religion or think that they get, and whether and how non-believers can have them too. No part of the book attacks religious belief or tries to convince people not to believe in God. Other people have done that. We of Little Faith simply aims to encourage non-believers to be more honest. And it aims to make everyone, both believers and non-believers, think a little bit more about the culture that we live in and which parts of how we were raised we want to pass on, and which parts we maybe want to pass on. I would guess that most of you have stories about your early religious upbringing and the path that brought you here today. And to be honest, I would expect that most of those stories are far more dramatic than mine. I was raised a Reformed Jew in the Shenandoah Valley. Once my dad got a job, we moved to Virginia. And we lit Sabbath candles most Friday nights, and we went to services. And my sisters and I became bat mitzvah. We all became bat mitzvah. I don't know how much you know about the Jewish liturgy, but basically it consists entirely of praising God Almighty and thanking Him for various things: bread, wine, smiting our enemies, that kind of thing. So like a lot of my childhood was spent praising God, and yet I never believed. I never actually believed that a supreme being was up there listening to me. I'm not sure why. It didn't take. I didn't think it was true. I thought it was folklore. I thought it was tradition. I thought it was literature. I mean, when I was little, I thought it was a story. I didn't put it in such fancy terms, but that's what it was. It was like the Old Testament God was like Peter Pan to me. A great character, an interesting idea, jerk, but not a real jerk, a made-up jerk. That's what I thought, and yet I basically kept that to myself for years. I pretended to believe, sometimes through outright deception, and mostly by letting people believe that what I believed matched the way I was behaving, which was as a young Jewish girl, and then a young Jewish college student, and then a young Jewish adult. So why did I pretend? I mean, this is a good question because my parents would not have cared. I really don't think they would have cared. My father's an English professor. We were big readers. We talked about everything. It's funny how you censor yourself, and even when you don't need to. I just assumed that everybody else's beliefs matched their behavior. That everyone else in that synagogue actually did think that a supreme being was listening to their prayers. And I didn't want to be different. To the extent that I could, as a Jewish kid in a very Christian area, I wanted to be like everyone else. And I wanted to be liked by everyone else, also very important. I was a smart kid, and I read context clues. In God we trust, said my money. Under God, said the pledge. God bless America, said every politician at the end of every speech. So, got it. I got it. Normal people believe in God. Americans believe in God. On our good days, maybe we acknowledge that people might believe in different religions, but we all believe in a higher power, right? I mean, that was the cultural soup that I was going to say that I grew up in, but that's the cultural soup that we're living in now. So that was the culture in which I was absolutely not going to call myself an atheist. And that, I think, is why we really still don't know how many atheists there are in America. About 46% of Americans have called themselves atheists in a survey. Between 19 and 26% of Americans have told pollsters that they don't believe in God. That's a lot more. But that includes at least some people who also go to church or synagogue. Only 49% of Americans believe in the God of the Bible. But at least some of the nuns, those storied, fast-growing group of Americans who click none of the above on the surveys, some of them do believe in God. So it's really a confusing sort of data environment. And I think that totally makes sense, because you're trying to get people to admit to being part of a minority that is feared and reviled. Polls show that Americans don't trust atheists, don't want to vote for us, don't want their children to marry us. And studies show that even atheists think serial killers are more likely to be atheists than believers. So we're suspicious of ourselves. So no, I didn't tell my parents or my sisters or my rabbi or my Sunday school teacher that I didn't believe what most people around me seemed to believe. When I left home, I actively deceived my college, and after college, I purposely misled Italian cousins whose Holocaust survival story I was researching for my first book. I got married in a Jewish wedding to another non-believer, with the God parts turned down, but they were still there. We still did it. And then we had kids. And this is really sort of was the turning point for me. Having kids is the moment in a lot of people's lives when they return to their synagogues, their churches, their mosques. They feel that to be good parents, they should raise their children in a religion, usually the one that they were raised in. Maybe they didn't belong to a congregation in college or as a young adult, but when they have a family, they feel they have a responsibility to the next generation. And so did I. But for me, it was in the opposite way. I thought, here are these little developing brains, and it's my job to shape them and help them understand the world around them. I conceived an almost physical aversion to telling my kids something I didn't believe to be true. And I didn't believe God was anything other than a very popular human invention. So that is what I told them. And I'm going to read you the scene from the book. It's a chapter called Thunderbolt. Does anybody want to come and sit down? I'm going to drink some water. Perfect. Okay. Thunderbolt. I can tell you the exact moment when I started to raise my children as atheists. It didn't feel momentous at the time, but it was a moment. Noah was 5, Jesse was 3, and we were sitting on the couch reading from D'Aulaire's book of Greek myths, a holdover from my childhood bookshelf. Those illustrations freaked me out as a kid. It's one thing to read that Cronus ate his babies, but it's quite another to see it. So naturally, I had to share the experience with my boys. Anyway, one of the boys asked what a myth was, and I told them it was a story about how the world works. People used to believe that these gods were in charge of what happened on Earth, and these stories helped explain things they didn't understand, like winter or stars or thunder. See, look, I flipped ahead to find a picture. Zeus has a thunderbolt. They don't believe them anymore? No, I said. That's why they call it myth. When people still believe it, they call it religion. Like the stories about God and Moses that we read at Passover, or the ones about Jesus and Christmas. They're just made up stories, but like myths, but people still believe them. Here's how the D'Aulaire's book begins. In olden times, when men still worshipped ugly idols, there lived in the land of Greece a folk of shepherds and herdsmen who cherished light and beauty. They did not worship dark idols like their neighbors, but created instead their own beautiful, radiant gods. Every people creates its own gods, I said. The little warm bodies nodded, and we proceeded to Gaia and the Titans until I could feel Cronus lurking behind the next page. That was it, the big moment. I didn't set out to raise atheists per se. Before I had children, I certainly never planned to tell my children that religions were made up. I planned to read to them all the time and feed them food I made myself and make sure they wrote thank you notes. That was about it, except for one thing. I planned to tell them the truth. I just want to point out that that was an entire chapter. So I think we can agree that's the hallmark of great literature, very short chapters. So at first, the kids were the only ones I told the truth to. The context clues hadn't changed, even though I now lived in Albany, New York. The prevailing culture was still very clear on this point. Normal people believed in God. Likable people believed in God. I could tell my kids what I really thought because the great thing about kids is they don't judge you when they're little. Then they get older, and the great thing about the kids is that they're constantly judging you. So I had to start being as courageous outside the house as I was inside. And what I found was, when I told people the truth, not only did they not react badly, as I had feared, but they often ended up telling me about their own lack of belief, or their own doubts, or their own religious upbringing. In the chapter called We Are Not Alone, I describe a conversation I had with an acquaintance near my hometown in the Shenandoah Valley. I was home for Thanksgiving, and I had to make small talk with this lovely neighbor of my mother's. He had given me no indication that he was anything other than a believer. And in fact, our conversation stemmed from my expressing admiration for a statue of a saint that he had in his garden. But when I told him I didn't believe in any supernatural beings, he responded that he had a lot of trouble believing the stories of the Bible, and that he didn't like how his church treated women and gay people. His son was gay. I was shocked. And this is what I wrote. We all go around, I once did too, assuming that everyone else is a believer. I'll bet every private atheist in America knows someone who thinks they've never met an atheist before. I'll bet every private atheist in America sometimes feels like the only atheist in the room, while chatting with another atheist who feels like the only atheist in the room. We won't know the truth until we tell the truth. So one reason that people don't tell the truth is they're afraid to dismay or disappoint people. They're afraid to be disliked. And that is what part 1 is about, getting over that fear. But people also fear that being honest about not believing in God means giving up all the good stuff that religion promises to give. The comforts, the rules, the ritual, the community. And that's what part 2 is about. What do we get from religion? Do we need it? And if so, how can we get it as non-believers, as atheists? So I talk about death, which I think is really the reason why religion was invented, to cope with, to explain away our mortality. I talk about why I think holidays are important and what happens if you try to make up your own. I talk about whether there's any validity to the general assumption, which non-believers sometimes share, that morality comes from religion. I talk about why I'm drawn to churches and where to find spaces that achieve that same combination of extra bathroom and higher purpose. I talk about prayer, public and private. I talk about how to approach rites of passage when you don't believe in their religious underpinnings. Just as a spoiler here, I do not end up saying that to be an atheist, you have to renounce, Christmas trees, or give up matzo ball soup, or Renaissance art, or stop singing Amazing Grace in your choir or your shower. That's not where I come down on those questions. I think that there are atheists all around us who think what they think, believe what they believe, and also still participate some in the religions of their community or their upbringing, their family. And I don't do a lot of judging because I wasn't and am still that person. But the one thing that an atheist has to give up, kind of by definition, is the idea of a higher power, a protector God who's in charge. So the final chapter in part 2 is called Unplugging from the Higher Power. Just to give you a sense of what these chapters are like, this one starts in an AA meeting, and it travels to the NBA, and then it goes back to the Olympics, the ancient ones. There's a Coast Guard rescue, a poor school in Brooklyn that gets famous for about 5 minutes. And I'm pretty sure I end up in Scandinavia somehow in that chapter. It all comes together, I promise. I'm going to read you from a section toward the end of that chapter called Thoughts and Prayers. Few American events are as grotesque as the massacre of school children by guns. In these moments, I will not contest it. Religion appears to offer consolation. Angel Garza said of his murdered 10-year-old daughter, "My little love is now flying high with the angels above." Part of me hopes all the parents of children lost to gun violence are believers, that for the rest of their lives they live in an alternate reality, imagining, knowing that their children continue to live happily after death, watching out for their siblings. But I hope the rest of us know that's not true, or at least that we act as if it isn't. Because I've just thought of something more grotesque than a massacre of school children, the repeated massacre of school children. Best case, belief in God gives people solace when something terrible happens. Worst case, It allows them to shirk their very real responsibilities to one another while offering thoughts and prayers. Most people understand that bad religion, religion that preaches hate and shame, has done terrible things, from slaughtering people who worship other gods, to enabling sexual predators, to withholding condoms in AIDS-ravaged countries. Bad religion is responsible for, or at least helps to excuse, some of the worst things that people do to one another. But what about good religion? What about religion that clearly means no harm, tries to heal the world, or at least a small corner of it, and even inspires people to give up drinking, to start a school for poor students, to stay afloat until the Coast Guard comes, to make it through another grief-racked day? Bad religion endorsed slavery and sanctified racism. But didn't good religion fight for abolition and lead the civil rights movement? Yes, good religion has sometimes led us forward, but in the long run, it could still be holding us back. We may not want to think about it or to admit it, but we have the power to save not just Mott Hall Bridges School, but all the schools that struggle to help kids in impoverished areas. We have the power to end poverty. We can end the epidemic of gun massacres. We have the power to regulate gun ownership, to outlaw the civilian possession of military-style weapons, to buy back AR-15s, to hold gun manufacturers financially and legally liable for the carnage. Australia stopped it, New Zealand stopped it, England stopped it, Norway stopped it. But we can't stop it if we believe that a massacre is simply God calling his angels home. If we believe he has a mysterious plan that involves children hiding among their friends' dead bodies to keep from being shot themselves. We have to believe that what controls the circumstances of one human's life is humans, not just individually, but in the systems that we create together. Talking as if God were in charge encourages us to act as if he is. As if the differential between rich schools and poor schools, as if the next school massacre were not ultimately our responsibility. But they are. The next school massacre will not happen on God's watch. It will happen on ours. Some chapters in part 2 are darker, and some are lighter. Some have more Shakespeare, some have more Bull Durham. But they are all trying to get to serious ideas about how we make meaning as we go through our lives. So that's part 1 and part 2. But it's not quite all. When I first started writing We of Little Faith over a decade ago, I was really making an argument for people to be honest with one another in their private lives. For parents to be honest with their children, for children to be honest with their parents, for people to be honest with themselves. For me, it was such a relief to get to talk to my kids about life's big questions without having to pretend that I thought there was or might be a heaven, or that I thought there was or might be a God. And the more I gathered the courage to tell people outside my family that I was an atheist, the more I found out that I wasn't the only one whose beliefs and behaviors didn't match. I had been hiding the truth because I was afraid of cutting myself off from people, and yet telling the truth turned out to be an incredible path to connection. That is the first book I started to write, the first story I started to tell. But as America's politics began to change over the years, so did my project. I became more and more convinced that our cultural habit of deferring to religion, granting legal carve-outs and tax exemptions to religious institutions, listening to politicians and every speech with God Bless America, politely acting as if we all more or less believed in a higher power, was a habit we needed to break. Even as the number of nuns grows and church congregations shrink, religion has been claiming and gaining an astonishing amount of political power. You guys know this. Peel back every recent legislative and judicial effort to undermine women's rights, LGBTQ rights, even public education, and you find religion. Don't say gay laws. Laws denying trans kids medical care. School library book bans. So-called Parents' Bill of Rights. They are all motivated and or excused by religion. Laws that made legal abortion almost impossible to obtain, even while it was still constitutionally protected. And then the Dobbs decision that struck down Roe v. Wade. The punitive abortion bans that followed, all of that has religion at its core. And sometimes not at the core, right up at the surface. According to the bill itself, Missouri's total abortion ban was created in recognition that Almighty God is the author of life. And then there's the campaign to redefine the idea of religious liberty, which once referred to the freedom to worship or not as you see fit, and now refers to the freedom to follow U.S. law or not as your religion sees fit. Religious belief, more and more at the state and federal levels, is a way to sidestep advances the country makes in civil rights, human rights, and public health. 7 states allow pharmacists to refuse to fill contraceptive prescriptions on the basis of their religious beliefs. In 46 states and the District of Columbia, parents can get religious exemptions from laws that require school children to be vaccinated so that school children and the rest of us won't get sick and die. Exemptions and exceptions abound. Every business with a federal contract has to comply with federal non-discrimination rules, unless it's a religious organization. Every employer that provides health insurance has to comply with the Affordable Care Act's contraceptive mandate, unless it's a craft supply store with Christian owners. In Arizona last year, a court ruled that the Mormon Church was not responsible for reporting a father's ongoing rape of his daughter, even though the clergy knew about it, because religious confessions are exempt from the state's mandatory reporting law. This seems crazy. It's crazy. But it turns out that in 33 states, clergy are not subject to laws requiring teachers, doctors, school counselors, and therapists to report alleged child sexual abuse to the police if they learned about that abuse in confession. I just found that out, a few months ago. I'm still finding out. You can probably tell me some of the ways in which we give religious organizations an out from the rules that everybody else has to follow. Meanwhile, we are losing hold of one of the most basic protections our secular country is supposed to offer, the separation of church and state. Because of the concerted efforts of a small minority of Christian nationalists and the gullibility or passivity of a large majority of Americans, our country's commitment to the first right enumerated in our Bill of Rights, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, is faltering. The Supreme Court has ruled that the citizens of Maine have to pay for parochial school, that a high school football coach should be free to lead a prayer on the 50-yard line, that a potential wedding website designer can reject potential same-sex clients. Last summer, Oklahoma approved the nation's first publicly funded religious school. And in the fall, Texas began allowing schools to employ clergy members in place of guidance counselors. Our new Speaker of the House has said that God put him there, that his position on every issue can be found in the Bible, that America is a Christian nation, that I believe the separation of church and state is a misnomer, and that Christians have a duty to bring government under the sway of the principles of righteousness. Scary. Over the years, in short, I've realized that being honest about not believing in God is more than just a personal decision that I believe can improve your life and your relationships. It's a political decision. And I make this argument in the epilogue, which is kind of a stealth part 3, but it's still extremely short, I promise. And so I'll read a little section from the epilogue, and it's called Save the Country. You don't have to hate religion or feel disdain towards religious people to think that religious belief should not be shaping public policy, or to see that the prejudices written into the foundational myths of the world's 3 major monotheistic religions are driving much of the discrimination our fellow Americans suffer today. If you pretend to believe when you really don't, you allow people to behave as if belief in the supernatural is universal, as if it's not just the norm, but the only belief that is or should be normal. As if God's will has any place in a discussion of public policy. These belief systems don't just make it risky to be honest to American voters. They elevate the value of religion and religious beliefs over public health, scientific inquiry, civil rights, and economic justice. So far, anti-atheist sentiment is not a matter of life and death in America. It's not. But transphobia is. Sexual violence against women is. Forced birth is. Climate change is. And global pandemics are. If you need a reason to let people know that you don't believe moral authority derives from a supreme being, then I offer you no less than making America a safer, smarter, more just, and more compassionate country. We've come a long way here from footy pajamas and Greek myths. I know that. But I really think that it's all connected. The more of us who acknowledge publicly that that's what we're thinking privately, the more obvious it will be that what a particular character in a particular book has to say about morality should have absolutely no bearing on the laws that govern us. So I'm going to tell you one more little story about my daughter, Lena, and then we'll discuss, hoping you have questions. This happened at the grocery store right after Christmas. She was a preschooler. Her body still fit in that child seat in the front of the cart. A little brunette with a bob and bangs, otherwise looked just like me. We were waiting in line at the deli, and another shopper pushing a cart with a couple of kids of his own asked my daughter if Santa brought her anything good for Christmas. I thought this was a really dumb thing to ask a kid that you don't know. This was in Albany, New York, where schools closed for Yom Kippur. It was a bad bet. So I was trying to think of a way to tell him off, politely, when my daughter did it for me. She said to him, Santa Claus is just pretend. Just like that. Santa Claus is just pretend. No attitude, just handing over information. And I think about that sometimes when I write or speak about being an atheist. My daughter wasn't being brave. She was just telling the truth. And she didn't know yet that it was a truth she was supposed to keep to herself. That poor dad lost all the color in his face. Begged my daughter to keep quiet. Don't tell my kids, he said. Don't tell. So although I don't recommend telling other people's kids that Santa Claus is just pretend, I do believe that the more we say nicely but unapologetically that we are atheists, the more atheists we inspire to do the same. The more we say, and make it normal to say, that God is just pretend, the more we push back against the idea that God should have anything to do with our laws or our tax dollars. The idea that our neighbor's religious belief or Mike Johnson's should have any effect on our children, we can push back. Now, I believe we can have a discussion. Well, you know, I feel like, and the difference with the LGBTQ community, I mean, it's possible that a lot of that, and I described the strides made by the community in a very fast, very quick time, really. I mean, now we're in a period where it feels very scary again. But for a while there, you know, during my kind of early adulthood, that movement moved fast. And I wonder to what extent the you know, they can't help it, they're just born this way. I mean, I talk about it in terms of kind of the idea of coming out, and the more that you know, a nice, you know, PTA cupcake mom says she's an atheist, the more people will think, oh, okay, it's a safe thing to be, it's not a scary thing to be. But I also wonder, since you say that, there is something about the born this way argument that takes away the question of someone actually choosing to do something that throws everything else into question. And that's what being a vegan or an atheist does. It's sort of like, people don't want to know that people feel judged because, because they feel like you're choosing not to be part of a system shows them that they are part of the system, I guess. I mean, I find it really interesting because, of course, you know, the people that we're talking to when we go out into the world, they know that there are people who aren't believers. It's not a shock that those such people exist, right? It's not like we're in a closed system. So it's very interesting to me that what kind of a threat it is. And I will say that, I mean, I absolutely live in a different area from this area. And that is, that context I'm very clear on. I would not take a lot of risks. But I will have to say that a lot of times I find religious people that I speak to are almost not apologetic about being religious, but they want to make sure that I know that they're smart people. It's very Andrew Seidel, when he comes down, will tell you that this is a good sign. You know, that as terrifying as these Christian nationalists are, the fact that they are grabbing power as fast as they can shows that they see, well, that times have changed, and also that there is no way that they can do what they're doing democratically. When there have been moments in recent elections where people can actually speak, when there's referenda, there's pushback, and even in the gerrymandered situation, I think that I don't know. I think it's pretty clear that these people have overstepped. I really feel for all the people who are going to suffer in the meantime. I mean, I find it so horrifying. How many people's lives are going to get upended or ended until we get our reproductive rights back. Well, so I have a chapter on morality. That's one of those things that I think people think they get from religion. And so we spend the first part of the chapter arguing that they don't. And that's super fun. And then, then you're left at, okay, well, where do we get it? Well, I think where we get it is kind of just the golden rule. I mean, it's really just this sense of we feel empathy, and you're going to say that comes from religion. And I'm going to say, I see your face. You should see her face. Skepticism. Yeah. And I'm going to say it is, it's in every religion, every single religion. Does that tell us that it comes from religion? Or does that tell us that every religion has to account for this very basic sort of human empathy crossed with, a sense of purpose. That's all it is. It's sort of seeing that someone else is like me. That's our starting point. It gets more complicated, but how should they be treated? And I think that the very fact that it is absolutely universal, every religion you can think of, is a tell. So, but you should read. Okay, then yes. I mean, I'm sure Mike Johnson reads my column in the Washington. Again, I think people know that atheists, people like him know that atheists exist. And the important thing, I believe, is enough of us sort of claim that term, then when he uses that term to say horrible things about people, or to imply that we want to destroy American society or anything like that, it's people have this baseline understanding that maybe that's not true. So no, I guess I'm certainly not trying to change Mike Johnson's mind. When I find myself on the verge of pretending or of letting someone think something, I understand, I see that you think a certain thing about me. I try to choose those moments to speak the truth instead. So it's a small thing. It's not a big thing. But I've had people write to me some wonderful stories of their kind of pushing themselves to do that, in a hospital setting, when someone came to, help give last rites to their, a parent who wouldn't have wanted it, or where there's an opportunity not to lie but to dissemble or something like that, and choosing the other direction. So it may not come up that often for you, but when it does, okay. Yeah. I totally agree with you that we can come together. You guys do an amazing job of organizing these things, and you find a space and everybody can come together, and it's incredible. But there is something about that kind of, weekly obligation, and the prayers that everyone knows. I mean, I can say the Lord's Prayer. I mean, there's something about that sort of common language that does something. It doesn't. It does something. It has a function. And I do have a chapter about prayer, and I talk about some of this. But that is one of the hard things. Is not having kind of those common rituals, those common things. But it was honestly a hard thing in a pluralistic society anyway. I've been to funerals for people that I care deeply about, and it's a Catholic mass, or it's it's a jumble, and there's no sort of comforting rules for how we're all supposed to behave. Again, because my kids were, still did Jewish things when we were growing up, that definitely gave them an out to sort of, when their school did anything that was kind of religious, they didn't do anything that was religious. This is Albany, New York, but there was definitely like we all believe in holidays and how does your family celebrate and things like that. And they could always fall back on the Jewish stuff, which is, an option, not Jewish necessarily, but, lying is an option. If you have something that it's actually going on in school that you think is wrong, you can always contact the Freedom from Religion Foundation. But in terms of talking to friends, that's tough. I think what I try to keep in mind, and I think what I try to I try to teach my kids two things, and one is like social skills. I mean, obviously, there's good times and bad times for talking about whether God is pretend. And the other one is that, again, you just don't know what's in someone's head. So they may be doing what their family does, and that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they believe. But so I think if you can come at it, if you want to bring it up, and I would never tell somebody that they have to. If you can come at it with the idea that you may be giving them a gift of honesty that they need, and if not, just your presence and your kind of clearly being a good person and a good friend, I think will go a long way. But I really don't want to. I mean, I was so aware when I was writing this book that I was in a very risk-free position when I took the steps that I took, and I don't want to put people in any kind of a danger, even if it's social danger or professional danger, anything like that. I'm not asking for that. I guess I'm only asking if you are in a position where you don't risk anything. I feel like maybe those people, we people, have an extra responsibility for people who don't have an option. If we start with the idea that we made these laws for a reason, and that there's no particular reason why a certain set of beliefs should get to supersede U.S. law, I think that's a good place to start. Okay, one more. I definitely think that, and they've had studies to show that that there's a correlation between very religious people and people who believe in conspiracy theories or for Trump or there is a correlation, this sort of different attitude toward fact versus fiction, and you can. Raising your children in a religion it is actually a confusing thing to their brains when they're trying to figure things out. So on that level, I don't know. Is the discourse getting kind of crazier than it was? And religion is part of that mix. It seems like it. All right. Well, I'm gonna thank you all. And I'm gonna